Okay, so welcome everybody to this third Honours Q&A run by Bruce Girdwood. Tonight we are looking at fellowships. So over to you, Bruce.
Thanks very much, Paul. Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces and there's some people that I don't know. So welcome, and don't feel shy to introduce yourself if you want to. Okay, cool. All right. So fellowship is, it's an interesting honour, and it's a little bit different to the associate and the licentiate. So we're moving into the space of people expressing themselves quite uniquely. So it's getting into more of an arty sort of a space. And fellowships, when I sit down with the board each year and we work our way through what it is that makes a fellowship, it's very hard to define. The and the way we articulate it to ourselves is when you see it, you'll know it, which is not exactly a precise science, but I think that's generally tends to be the way that it works. I'm going to just pop up a slide. I'm going to share my screen, and can you see that? Okay. Right. Yes, you should see the preparing for honours slide. This is a fairly generic slideshow, so it deals with all of the honours, but we'll just go through it a little bit. When you get to the fellowship level, you're starting to express. You've gone past the demonstration that you've got skills, which is really what the licentiate and the associate are. So we've now got to the point where you've proved through your associate that you've got advanced skills in photography. Now we're looking for you to show some form of mastery of your subject. And you're taking an idea or a concept and converting that into an exploration through 18 images in your fellowship. And it's you're at the top of your game, and there's no real rules about around the fellowship apart from that sort of thesis-like approach. So at the bottom there, you'll see I've mastered my craft and I can use it to express myself uniquely. I'm an artist and I have my own style. And what we find works really well with the fellowship is somebody who's got an idea or a concept, and they build that through the fellowship, and it can be quite abstract. It could be nature, it could be street photography, photojournalism, all those sorts of things. But there is an idea in there that flows through everything, and you develop that idea and you express yourself quite fully through the set. Quite often with the fellowship, we find people have got a good idea, but halfway through the set it starts to fall apart. So for the first 8 or 9 images we've seen, they're fantastic, they're the fellowship standard, and then you can see it kind of peters out and it starts to repeat itself, or it doesn't quite finish the concept. And the concept is expressed normally through that artist statement, which is it required, Stephanie, in the guidelines? I think it might be. No, it's not. You're on mute.
It's not required, no, but it's not required. Yeah. It's fairly essential.
Yeah. So with a fellowship, it's almost all fellowships come with an artist statement. We read the artist statement. It starts to give us an idea of what you're thinking, and then we look for the expression of that through your photography. That doesn't mean to say that your artist statement is the be all and the end all. It is the photography that is the be all and the end all. Sometimes, though, we'll see the artist statement and then we'll look at the photographs and we'll wonder what the relationship is between them, and that's not so great. So just mastery. And move on to this one. We've done all of those. So when we look at what makes a good photograph, a set of photographs, that there's the visual design, that's the craft. This is what the licentiate is supposed to show. And then when you start composing your image and moving away from craft, you're starting to put things together in the photograph in a way that's unique to you and starts telling the story in your own way. to communicate whatever it is, you know, a feeling, a story, whatever is your objective. And at the fellowship level, you are showing your individual style and you're showing your perspective on the world, however you choose. So, for example, we've had fellowship sets, and I'll show you some, where somebody's had the concept of how plastic is choking the oceans. So the set of 18 images was essentially started off showing bits of plastic that looked like fish. And as the plastic sinks deeper and deeper into the ocean, and then more of it is in the ocean, the fish start to disfigure and eventually peter off into nothing. And so that idea is flowed through 18 images, and that's quite difficult to show that progression in 18 images. But if you can do it really well and you've really advanced that concept and taken it through, when it works, it is absolutely stunning. So that's an idea, a concept, and then it is expressed through the photography in that unique style of the photographer. Don't worry about these. Portfolio is really quite important as well. So for your fellowship, we look at this work as a body of work, and it needs to really hang together, and your story needs to be told through those images in some clever way. So with the licentiate, there's not necessarily a story that follows through all the images, but with a fellowship, it certainly becomes much more of a story that flows through your images. So we could look at one image after the other and see the story developing as you go through the fellowship, and then you look at the whole set and you can see the whole story. And with the digital, it's a bit like the rest. The story gets told one image after the other. So we're looking at the progression of the story as one image flows from the other one, and the overall impression is left in the viewer's mind. Any questions so far from anyone? I'm very happy for this to be a conversation. I see you all. No questions, no comments. Come on, Val, I'm sure you've got questions.
I probably have, but yeah, just voicing them and just seeing how it all works together so that you've got the diversity that I think you're looking for, as well as that flow and developing the story, so that you haven't got any repetition.
Yeah, I think diversity is a difficult one in a fellowship. So when we talk about diversity in the associates and the licentiate, the diversity means you're showing us a set of general skills. So you need to show different lighting, you can show different subject matters, different perspectives, and all that sort of thing. We're not looking for that in the fellowship because you've already shown that at the advanced level with the licentiate. What we're looking for is you to specialize in telling a story in a particular way. So you could explore one technique, right, and one idea in 18 different ways and develop it through those 18 images. So you don't have to show diversity in photographic skill at all. It's quite fine to actually really specialize with one approach and one subject matter, using a theme and just working it to your heart's content. Does that make sense to everybody?
Bruce, I think the example of that was the water droplet shots from last year. Yes,
we'll look at some sets in a minute.
Yeah, Bruce, I'd just like to. It's Mark Burgess here. Am I coming through?
Mark. Yes, you are.
Yeah, hi. You just like to explore that concept of telling the story in 18 images. Mm-hmm. And I have actually looked very closely at past work. Last year, all the successful F sets were, well, they were journeys in life, really. So their topic lent themselves to an obvious progression where you could look at them and say, well, that's slightly, those two images are misplaced in some way. I mean, obviously, going from an egg to a fledgling chick, it's, well, I suppose it would be almost impossible to get them out of order, but you could do that, I guess. And it would be obvious to all concerned, at any rate, if you were a nature judge.
Yes.
I'm really thinking of other kinds of topics where the Honours Board, for example, might not look at the 18 images and even think that they might be out of order in the sense that the order wasn't necessarily important. In other words, is it conceivable that an F set can be 18 images which collectively make a point, but don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that question make sense? I mean, for example, if you're in, I can't find any example of a landscape genre being successful, but if one sort of thought, this is not a literal example that I'm intending to do, but have you said, I want to talk about the solitude of the New Zealand bush, or the beauty of the New Zealand bush, or the beauty of the New Zealand landscape? I would assume you wouldn't be looking for, well, it would obviously have an opening and a closing image, but would they necessarily be the sense of a storytelling? I mean, would you start with the dawn and end with a picture of the aurora or the Milky Way? You know what I mean? I wouldn't think that way. I would have thought it would be feasible to have 18 glorious images, maybe all shot in the middle of the day, if you like, and that would be successful. But I don't actually see that happening. So that's my dilemma. I don't see those kinds of sets being successful. And it's true that people very focused on story.
You know, right in the beginning, Mark, I was quite keen to just make sure that people understand that the concept, you know, it's a concept, it's an idea, it's a story. So if you take the concept of the loneliness or isolation of the New Zealand bush, and you find a way of expressing that in 18 images as a concept, and you manage to get that across really well in your style and way, sounds to me like a really good way to go. So it doesn't have to be a story. It's an exploration of an idea, a concept, a story, whatever. But whatever you want to do, it's about developing that through those 18 images and in a convincing way that communicates and engages others.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for that comment. I don't know what you see in the unsuccessful images, but what we see in the successful sets are very much stories in a conventional sense. So hence one being worried about offering something which didn't fit that format.
Mark, I wouldn't be worried at all. You know, if you're doing fantastic photography and you're mastering your subject and you've got advanced storytelling, when I say storytelling, I mean that in the most general sense, abilities in your photography, and you have you know, the sets that are successful generally also have, it's not just the mastery of the subject matter, the concept or the idea, it's also the style of photography that you use and consistently use that or progress from one style to another to help you develop that idea is very much part of it. And we see quite often some sets which have got really advanced ideas, but the presentation and preparation is not consistent or really good. So when we talk about mastery, it's mastery in all the aspects. So your post-processing if you're doing digital, your printing if you're doing printing, and consistently, you know, there's a consistent quality as you go all the way through. And we've had some sets which we've absolutely wanted to put through, but the production lets it down because they haven't concentrated on some of those production aspects. So yeah, the fellowship's complex. The challenge for the Honours Board is to engage with the set and try and understand it sometimes. So I can remember a set that came up and we looked at it about 3 or 4 times and nobody understood what the hell was going on. And the Honours Board was ready to get it to sort of.
Oops.
You've muted yourself, Bruce.
That's probably a good thing if I'm talking junk. So yeah, it was a very complex set. And when I looked at it, I immediately thought to myself, this comes out of a very complex mind, and our job is to try and unpick what the set is trying to say. And we took and I think there were people on the honours board that were quite, it was just too much for them to get their head around, so they didn't engage with it. So I think it's our duty to engage with a set, and sometimes it does take a little bit of figuring out. So if you find one element in an image and you say, okay, well, what does that mean? And then slowly but surely you start to work your way through the element, one element after another. So I look at it in layers, so I find a layer, right? Is there another layer that tells another part of the story? Is there another layer that tells another part of the story? And then suddenly you realize there's a clock, and that clock starts to repeat in different images. And then if you start following the clock and the next idea in the set, you start picking up other concepts that are flowing through until eventually you realize that you might be in a story, and that story is flowing all the way through the set. And my mind is I'm quite simple in my own photography, but there's levels of complexity. And we sometimes do have to unravel the set, but once we start to get it, and then we see how the story is evolving, it's quite a revelation. So yeah, it's fine to challenge us. There's 6 of us, and we've got very different backgrounds. And when I do the induction for the honours board at the beginning, we are really clear that our job is to try and do the best we can for the submitter, and we take all the time that we need to understand the photography and assess it. And with the fellowships, we've literally got all day to do them, and we just take as much time as we need. And sometimes it's a huge, big conversation, and it can be very challenging. But it's very
Yes, thanks very much, Bruce. That's helpful.
Yeah, cool, great. Hi, Cliff. Nice to see you here. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, should we go and look at some sets then? I'll try and get I'll get the website up and jump in there. Honours. Why can't I find them?
No.
Fellowships. Right, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, hopefully you'll get that screen. Okay, you should see the website up there, right?
Got it.
Right. So, honour sets these fellowship sets can be very controversial. This was Anita Kirkpatrick, and this honour set is They Are Us. And this was the year that we had the Christchurch mosque shooting. And Anita, I put the set together, and there's a construction that goes on here. Each image is constructed with pencil leads, basically, and she's done those, and then she's told the story. And yeah, it challenged us in the sense that is this photographs of art, or is this photographic art? And I think in the end of the day, we concluded that it was a combination of the two. You can't really see it here, but the way she's used shadows and the lighting and all of those things creates a nice little photographic image that enhances the original drawings. So it's not just, we're not drawing the original construct. So photography has definitely lifted up and made it what it is. But as we go through this, she tells the story of the shooting in the mosque, and she develops that story as we go through. So this is about where it is. That's the place. You know, this talks about the culture. These are the bullets and the praying, and so it goes. And the story evolves. So there's you know, a story in this one, and it's presented in a way that is quite interesting, right? This one is Annette Johnson, and let's have a look. We don't have the artist statement here, but Annette has used the concept here. She is trying to show off the Central Otago landscape, and the way she does it is by weaving in the essential elements of that landscape. And this set is about as much about what's in it as what's not in it. So it exploits the idea that our memory and our mind fills in the gap. So when we think about a landscape or anything, we think about certain bits, and then our mind fills in the rest. And she's exploited that concept in the set. And this is all digitally done, so there's no physical weaving. So the skill of creating this weaving effect in Photoshop is great. And you know, this was just such a wonderful set, and it just picks out those essential elements of the landscape, and then your mind fills in all the blanks, because we've seen a lot of this stuff before. And as you go through the set, you're seeing different bits of that landscape, and she exposes them through these little vignettes in the weaving. So there's a concept that has been thought about, and then she's come up with a sophisticated way of presenting it. And if you look at her layout, you know, you look at the top row, you know, you've got this layout of weaving reflected on the other side by a similar layout, but it's reflected. You've got the same thing going over there, and again here, and you can see that's repeated in each row, and then the colors are very carefully coordinated, and the whole thing just looks like a complete piece of work.
Bruce, would it help if I read out the artist statement?
That would be great. Thank you, Steph.
Okay. It's called Weaving Memories. The fabric of life is woven by memories, touch, feel, smell, and sight. Vertical strands intersect the horizontal, their woven accents, dotted notes of delicacy and pause. A bed of white canvas becomes the spaces that are in between, a melodic counterpoint, caesura to the eye. A misty morn, -5 and frosty. Yesterday's landscape, so ordinary, today transformed. I am cocooned in a diaphanous world, wrapped in gossamer threads of soft white grey. A light breeze becomes a conjurer, revealing brief apparitions of lone trees, a ruined hut, grasses festooned in sequins of ice, 2 swans upon a pond, their bugling a discordant note from beyond. My world has become patterns to be discovered, gazed upon, explored. The texture upon a tree, jagged rocks, braided rivers viewed from on high, icebergs freed from glacial flows, mirrored upon a warp of blue, a weft of green. Other dawns break. What discoveries will each day make? Clear blue skies, winter colours of denuded willows, golden tussock blowing to and fro, mountains kissed by light, others dusted in snow. The fabric of my life is woven by memories. The warp and weft record a reverie, an ineffable testament to what is me.
There you go. And it's a wonderful concept and amazingly executed. And when you see this set in the reel, the presentation is immaculate.
That's Bruce, if I ask a question, that statement of intent, how much weight does that carry in your view over looking at the panel as well? Because you know that was really very complex writing and simple but complex and meaningful and very very deep writing.
Yes, Cliff, it's quite hard to answer that question in a clear way the relationship between that artist statement. So that was a complex artist statement, and if you'd read that artist statement before you looked at the images, your expectation would be that this would be an amazing set and it would explore a whole bunch of really interesting concepts. If it didn't follow through, the conclusion might be, and I'm not saying that it always is, the conclusion might be that you've had a really good concept, but you actually haven't evolved that concept to communicate through the images. So if we looked at the images and we couldn't see the vision in the artist statement, then there's a real disconnect, and that could influence our thinking, because if you're not executing what you've said, then the set is not working.
Okay, and just following on from there, now Annette's obviously got very good way with words. What if the person hasn't got a good way with words to write their intent?
Yeah, I think some people don't write very much, Cliff, and then really we have to explore the set, and sometimes that's just the way. And most of the time, where there is a really good connection between, I think I've already said this, a good connection between the statement and the images. That's, it's very hard not to conclude that they have taken their idea, which is articulated in an artist statement, and successfully executed it. I don't think we look necessarily for the best words. So it doesn't have to be, the artist statement doesn't have to be a sophisticated artist statement, but if it connects well with the imagery, then that's a really good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Bruce or Stephanie, maybe. I've written some trial artist statements for what I've been working on. But one of the things I've noticed that was almost limiting was I'm pretty sure there's a requirement that it be no more than 100 words. And to an extent, you could argue, well, less is more. Obviously, in this particular instance, that artist statement is just beautiful. It's poetic, but it's wildly more than 100 words. So I just wonder if I've misread the requirements, or whether it's actually written there, but you're forgiving of something which is a bit over the limit, as it were.
I have been quite forgiving. I actually think the number of words needs to be increased. And I'm not sure what you think about that, Bruce.
My view would be, you're not going, this is about the photography. I think the idea behind the number of words is not so much only 100 words, but, don't give us 10,000.
No.
Because then it becomes a real mission for us to understand that. So I think it's about reasonableness. And Paul, maybe that's something we should just change in the guidelines, because it's a reasonable length and it should be appropriate to what you want to say. But I think the key point is it has to be reasonable, not over the top.
I think that artist statement, I think, was 180 words.
Yeah.
And I did have a conversation with the author about it. And that set me to thinking that perhaps we need to say, a maximum of around 200.
Or maybe even 3 or 4. But, even if that's 180 words, that's quite a lot, because it took a while to read. So I think the answer is be reasonable, but, do what you need to do, and don't be too hammered by the 100, but please don't give us 500 or 1,000. Yeah.
I have to read them, so don't, please.
Yeah, it's about the photography. Just do what you need to do to get your idea across. Yeah.
I think you do need to clarify it, Bruce, in the guidelines, because you and I have had a discussion about comments that were made this year when one successful set was way over the limit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the word reasonable and appropriate that you mentioned, Bruce, was poignant, and that should be one way to approach it.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Cliff. Neil, you
Yeah.
had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I had the pleasure of seeing this, I think it was in Christchurch. It was absolutely stunning set, and you know, the whole concept is great. But it, one of the things that comes up, I think there was a question earlier about diversity, which I think really meant more maybe that you don't have images which are similar to each other. In other words, that you know, they may all be landscapes or whatever. We don't want two landscapes to look the same. Yet I see here, and I have no problem with it. You see, for example, the two images right in the middle, which aside from being flipped, you know, they're basically, I think, from what I can see from the resolution here, you know, images of stone or rock or something like that. And and if you were to submit two images like that, say to an exhibition or to a salon, there's no way both would be picked. They would be seen as being extremely similar. But in the context of a portfolio, a story, you know, the weaving together, they work beautifully. So, you know, I think it probably reflects the difficulties you have sometimes in the honours board about, you know, it just works, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, sometimes you do get repetition, but I think with these images, just because some of them look similar, they do work, and they, you know, if you only had one of those, in the way that you just have to look at the overall construct, and the overall construct is such that, you know, those, you know, it works really well. If you had too many really similar images in the set, it starts to tell you that this person is doesn't have the imagination to be able to express their concept in 18 images, and it starts to labor the point. We didn't feel that that was happening in this set, although I can see your point.
To be clear, my point wasn't critical. My point was that in the context of the set overall, I see no problem with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. I mean, you can see, you know, the blue ones on either end, and there's, you know, if you look at the construction over here of this image compared to, say, that image, you know, the layering is the same, but the images are quite different. And when you look at it from a memory point of view and filling the gaps, then you get quite different. You relate to them each differently. And similarly up here, you know, you've got a similar construct, but one with birds in and one without birds, and they convey very different feelings. Yeah. Okay. So that's that one. And then you get something completely different like this one. And this one is definitely one of those sets that had us really challenged in terms of, you know, what the heck is going on here and what's the story. Steph, are you able to read Christine's statement? You're on mute.
That's Harvey Benj.
No, Christine Redshaw.
Yeah, no, but that was that not who she based
yes,
the work
that's
on?
the one. That's the one.
My portfolio is inspired by photographer Harvey Benj and by a challenge to shoot a book in a day. The allocated date for the project set the tone. The hypothesis was that my senses and creativity would be heightened and my photography mastery revealed by the resultant time-bound images. It required being accurately aware of my surrounds and the unfettered use of my natural instincts. Time was of the essence, thus a requirement for decisiveness in shot selection, camera settings, and lens selection. Showcasing my artistry, the images are gritty and emotive with an urban vibe. With subtle placement, the presentation is chosen to facilitate viewing the set as a whole and taking the viewer on a journey for their exploration and interpretation of a story I have curated by turning to the dark side.
Okay, so that artist statement doesn't give you any clues about the story except about turning to the dark side. So I can tell you, when we looked at the set, and I think the titles are not on here, but the titles of each of these images were really important in terms of trying to figure out the story. So, you know, when I've looked at the first image, I thought, oh, this is not great photography, but, you know, you can see a green cross that's very dull. And then you ask a question about the light switch. Actually, the titles are actually on each one of the images. I don't know that we'll be able to see them.
I can see them, Bruce.
Okay.
Number one is pray for light.
Okay, and the next one is
No light.
light. Okay, so you pray for the light, and there's no light, and then
Brother George.
Yep.
And then
So
Cash.
So you then sort of introduce a person. So pray for light, no light. You introduce a person, and
then Home Sweet. Oh no, I can't read.
Okay.
It looks like Home Sweet Home, but I don't think it is.
Yeah, it is Home Sweet Home. So it was no cash, Home Sweet Home with a gun.
And then Safe at Home.
Yep. Yeah, right.
Then the Getaway Car.
Oh, Safe at Home. Which one? What is this one at the end here with the stool?
That's called Safe at Home.
Okay, and then
the Getaway Car.
No, before that.
Oh, is Home Sweet Home.
Safe. I say it's Home Sweet Home, and then there's Safe Home, and then there's the Getaway Car, and then there's
Rendezvous.
Yep. And then
Contemplation.
I don't know. I think you've got them.
That's Rendezvous is the one. Oh, there's yeah, I'm looking at them as a different layout. There's no church on my. Oh, yeah, beg your pardon, I missed that.
Yeah.
Safe House is the church.
Yep, and then Rendezvous.
Sorry. Then the Getaway Car.
Then the Rendezvous.
Rendezvous, and then Contemplation.
Yep. And
then No Title.
Yeah. So you get left to figure out what's going on in this image, and then
with Home Sweet Home number 2.
Right. So it becomes something that looks like an institution.
And then the bottom line, shit happens.
Yep. Yep. Next one.
End of the line.
Yep. So that has in my view, has an inference to perhaps drugs. And then
Last Call.
Yep. So 111 or whatever.
Yep.
And then
You Broke My Heart.
Yep. And then you've got the coffin.
Boxed in.
And then
Free as a Bird.
Okay, Free as a Bird. So can you see how that story is evolving to the dark side, right? And that's it left actually depending on how what experiences you've had in life, and the things that have played out in your life where you've been associated with, this set can be really triggering, and it was. So that is an extremely well told story in a style that absolutely works, and she's been really clear about the use of somebody else's style, which she has evolved and developed to her own, and told the story really well. And when we discovered who the photographer was, I was gobsmacked that she could do this kind of work. Yep. Any questions or comments? So these can be very, very powerful sets. And look at the variation. So each one of these sets are completely different and highly individual.
Do you want me to read the fellow statement for Anita's?
Not unless anybody wants to hear it. Okay, let's see if we can go. And this year we had a different set of images, 2018, 19, 21, 22. Okay, so this year we had proliferation. I think we had a number of natures. So if you're interested in nature, unfortunately, you need to see these ones quite close up. But it tells this. Oh, do you want to read the artist statement for this, Steph? This is Trisha's one. Trish McCausland. I think it was yep.
Just click on statement of intent.
So you're telling the nature story in 18 images can be quite challenging from time to time. So you can see as you work our way through this, how the story of the courtship, the mating, the laying of the egg, the looking after of the egg, the hatching, the feeding, and the evolution of the chick until eventually it's heading off and doing its thing. So it's quite a conventional story, but the relationships that Trish has shown through all of this, by the way she's cropped it and evolved the story through these 18 images, is really, really good. And some of the photography around, down this end here with the flying and the relationships and then capturing this moment at the end is quite powerful. So yeah, it's a simple nature story that's been told many a time, but she's captured, in our view, all the different steps in that way and told that story really well with great photography. And you can see the quality of the photography all the way through is pretty good. There's the odd image that is a little bit grey compared to the rest, and that raised a few questions for us. But in the end, sometimes you just don't have control over those things. Maybe a little bit of post-processing might have tidied it up, but in a nature set, you don't want to do that too much. So on balance, we thought the story was overwhelmingly positive in driving her to a successful set.
And the artist's statement for that one was quite short. Did you want me to read that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. White-fronted terns of Hyrene Bridge. Each spring, a small group of white-fronted terns return to lay their eggs and raise their young on the piles of the old Hyrene Bridge. Despite its central city location, the birds ignore the constant stream of traffic, cyclists and pedestrians who use this harbour crossing each day. Are there any chicks yet? Or what are the chicks doing today? Are commonly heard from pedestrians and photographers. The numbers are slowly increasing, and this year 23 chicks fledged. In late summer, some of the fledglings will fly to Australia, while the rest will spend winter on beaches and islands around the New Zealand coast. For me, it has been a unique opportunity and privilege to spend time observing and photographing these beautiful birds. I have told the story of the nesting season in this set of photographs, and she has included all of her, the titles of all of her images below her artist statement.
Okay, great. And then Toya gave up her set was a digital one, and it was Australasian gannets. And her story here is the adult. You can read it for yourself, so I'll leave it up there for a bit. The gannets can be quite challenging because they've been done so many times, and with a fellowship, it is about telling that story really well. So Toya has taken an approach which is quite different to the approach that we generally see. So she's got close in, and she's exploited that to tell her nature story. Okay, so here is the courting, and you know what's going on, but you don't see it all, right? And then, instead of showing the whole context, she's just getting in to the different aspects of the story and the relationships between the birds and the egg is exploited really nicely. And look at that moment as the egg is cracking. I mean, that's amazing that she was able to catch that moment. And a very fresh chick, and the gentleness of the mum. Again, as we start getting our feathers and feeding and development, a bit more growth. Yes. And so we go. It's time to go. So that's the story. So told quite differently, quite an interesting perspective, and you know, just getting in tightly instead of doing the conventional thing, which was great. Any questions? Because the nature ones quite often get quite a lot of conversation. And then life's a journey, and Shona told her story through water drops, and she had taken this concept of life, and through her photography, she has attributed you know, characteristics through the you know, the shapes and forms that she's got through building her drops, and those connections are quite interesting. And it was, you know, interesting to make those connections and to see how somebody has evolved these ideas and done the work through her through this particular medium and find those characteristics through water drops. And yeah, and so it went. And those connections are quite strong. Yeah. So there you go. That's sort of pretty much what I wanted to say. Hopefully that's helpful. As you see, each one of these sets are all very, very different, and they are thematic, and they show a perspective of a particular individual, and their style of photography. So that's what we're looking for at a fellowship level. So surprise and delight us, challenge us. That's what it's all about. And is there any formula? No. So it's clear as mud then?
If only.
Yeah, you know, I'll just talk a little bit about my fellowship journey. I had an idea, and the idea was to use a technique to show the ebb and flow. I found a beach. I really loved that beach, and it was a place that, at first sight, was very bleak. And I remember many years before, I'd been on a trip to South Africa, and I'd gone to the Atlantic coast, quite far north on the west coast, with a fabulous photographer called Kula Swart. And we were camping on the coast, and she was watching me photographing and strutting in that space. And she said, I know what I'm going to do for you. And she loaded me up in her ute, and she drove me about 10 kilometers up the coast to a stony beach, the most godforsaken place I think I've ever known. It was cold, it was breezy, there was fog coming in from the Atlantic, which it does, and that's a cold ocean, and there was a desert on one side, and then there was a stony beach. And she just looked at me, and she dropped me on the road, and she said, make friends with this place. And then she drove away, and I had no idea when she was coming back again. And I was just stuck in this place for who knows how long. I never made friends with that place. I fought that place all day, and eventually she came back, and I did not thank her. And she said, well, did you make friends? I said, no, I just fought it all day, and I got angry with you. And she just laughed. And she said, if you're not careful, I'll bring you back tomorrow, and you will do the same thing. Well, I found every excuse in the sun not to be taken back the next day and avoided her like the plague and never ended up back. Then I landed on Rarangi Beach, and I always regretted never making friends with that place with my camera. And I ended up on Rarangi Beach in Blenheim, and it was the same sort of feeling that I had on that west coast. And I thought, right, I'm going to make friends with this place and I'm going to close that cycle. And so I decided that my concept was the ebb and flow of the ocean and the cycle of the day. And I was going to do it with in-camera blur to accentuate all the different elements that I saw on that beach. And I was going to ultimately print it on galvanized iron. So the concept of time, both in the ocean's movement and the time in the cycle of the day, and how you capture time through movement on in a photograph, and then printing it on galvanized iron to accentuate some of the characteristics of the ocean. So that's the concept. And then it took me 2 years to evolve that concept and the technique by moving my camera to create the feeling and the sense that I wanted for my fellowship. And then to be able to have enough images to arrange them in the way that I needed to be able to expose that concept. It took me 2 years of hard work. And when I got to the end, I, in typical fashion, left it to the last minute because there was that level of vulnerability in your mind, which was how much is this really a good enough idea? Is it going to work? And I've got to push the print button, which is going to cost me quite a lot of money. And actually, I just left it to the last minute that I possibly could to get the printing done, because that was the moment of commitment. And then I thought, right, I'm doing this, and off it went. And when they came back, I had realized that I had printed one wrong image, but I had no more time to go and reprint that image and then present the set that I had designed. So that night I redesigned my entire portfolio and came up with a completely different layout, which was a lot more creative. And it was the best mistake I've made in my photography in a long time. But I made friends with that beach. And then when the challenge came along, I had to instead of seeing it as a problem, I saw it as an opportunity to create a better set. And that's probably was very, very lucky. So, the fellowship is something like that. It's something you have to make friends with. And somewhere near the end of this, I decided I'm not going to do this. This idea is just too hard. I'm going to revert back to the things that I know really well. And that was African sand dunes, if you like. And once I started trying to put a set like that together, my level of enthusiasm just dropped through the floor, because it was no longer the challenge that I set myself, and I was never going to satisfy the original objective that I set for myself, which was to make friends with that beach, close that cycle that Kola started with me, and then create a new technique, master a new technique which I hadn't had before, and add that to my arsenal. So I went back to it and I finished it, but it took me 2 years once I got the idea.
I think that thing about learning and mastering is important. And certainly when I did my fellowship, it was very much along the same way. I wanted to, in my case, practice studio work and combine my my pictures with painting, because that's something my father did, and I was something I never believed I could. And so, yeah, learning and challenging yourself. And I spent hours and hours and hours on every aspect, learning how to use the new camera, how to light in the studio, how to use dyes on printed paper, and I think taking on that challenge, it does help you grow, and it's important in your own development. And I think just doing something like you said about the sand dunes isn't fulfilling.
No.
And it wasn't for me either. Yeah.
And Cliff, I always remember, we had long conversations about your set, and when you were doing your studies, about this whole idea of the development of an idea. So you have a concept that starts off with, and then you try it and you think, oh, well, this is not working. But actually, every time you give it a go, you know, the idea and the concept develops just a little bit more. And you just keep going and going and going and going until you get the concept evolved enough that it's actually credible, and then push it a little bit further. And that's very satisfying, but it can be really hard. But it is a process, and it's a process. Well, it can be a process, and that process for a lot of people is evolves. But actually, every time it goes through an evolution, if you're critical, you look at it and you say, is this good enough? What's the next step in this? You know, so if it doesn't feel quite right, try and understand what it is that doesn't quite feel right, and then just develop it one little bit more. I mean, I look at my fellowship now, and I'm sure, you know, others will look at their work, and it is a stage in life, and I look at it now, and there are definitely things that I could have done better. And if I had more time, I would have evolved it. And if I was going to do it now, I might do it a little bit differently. But that's life, isn't it? It's experience. But it got the fellowship. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. If you have any more questions after this, don't feel shy to give me a call just to test your thinking. But I think most people who go for a fellowship have generally got a very clear idea of where they are in their photographic journey and their own photographic identity. Trust that, believe in it, and then be really authentic to who you are. Put that onto whatever medium you want to present to us, and 9 times out of 10, that just speaks for itself.
Nine times out of 10.
Well, you know, if you get it right, I mean, I'm 9 times out of 10. It's just words. It's not a statistic. You know, if you do that, you're authentic to yourself, and you've got good mastery of your techniques and your photography. You know, that's a really good place to be, and those are the qualities required to get a good set across. So yeah, just be true, be you. Sometimes it means being a little bit vulnerable, putting your set out there, is exposing who you are quite strongly. Just be brave and embrace that vulnerability, and that will generally can add to making a fantastic set of photographs.
Well, thanks, Bruce, for giving up 3 nights in a row to do this. Very educational. We've had 72 people over the 3 nights. So 19 here tonight. So quite a lot of interest, even at this level. And for all of you who will take this and actually enter this year, best of luck. So I'm going to shut the recording now. This will be made available via the PSNZ YouTube and linked off the website probably next week.